He never paid much attention to the window in his new apartment at first. It was just a tall, narrow slit in the wall, framed in chipped wood, the glass slightly warped with age, always partially misted no matter how often he wiped it down. It didn't open, and that suited him just fine. He wasn't the type to lean out and take in the view, and besides, there wasn't much to see from the third floor of a crumbling building tucked into a forgotten backstreet. The alley beyond was narrow, always dim, with a brick wall on the opposite side, mottled with old graffiti and stained by decades of rain. He assumed that was all there was to it. But sometime during the second week, he started to feel that something about the window was off, not in the way it looked, but in the way it felt. He would pass it on his way to the kitchen and pause for no particular reason, struck by the stillness that seemed to cling to that part of the apartment. There was no draft, no sound, no shift of light, just an unmoving, oppressive quiet, as though something behind the glass was waiting. He tried to ignore it. Chalked it up to the isolation, to the silence of a new place, to the fact that he hadn't really spoken to anyone in days. But at night, when he moved through the dim corridor toward the bathroom, he began to notice something that made his throat tighten. The alley beyond the window never changed. Not once. No matter what time he looked, no matter the angle or the lighting, the wall opposite remained the same. Same cracks. Same peeling paint. Same shadow pooling in the lower corner. It wasn't just that it stayed the same, it was that it stayed too the same. As if the image beyond the glass were frozen, or worse, fabricated, like a painting designed to mimic a real view but never quite getting it right. One night, well past midnight, he stood before the window with the lights behind him turned off. The alley should have been dark. At that hour, the street lamps typically flickered or died altogether, but the scene outside glowed with a soft, ambient light that didn't match any source he could identify. And as he stared, he realized with a creeping sense of discomfort that there was no movement, not in the air, not in the shadows, not even the smallest twitch of life. No rats, no trash blowing across the ground, no cars passing at the far edge, no flicker from a distant window. The wall outside looked less like it was part of a city, and more like a photograph that never refreshed. He pressed his hand against the glass, half expecting it to feel cold, maybe to vibrate with the distant hum of a living city, but it was dry and perfectly still, not just glass, but a surface that rejected time. Then came the moment, so brief he doubted it as soon as it happened, when the shadows in the lower corner of the view shifted. Just a flicker. A subtle slide inward, like something moving slowly out of sight rather than into it. He leaned closer, holding his breath, squinting into the distance, trying to convince himself it was a trick of the eye or a passing bird, but there were no birds in that alley. Nothing passed through it. Nothing ever had. The next morning, the scene was unchanged. But now he could feel it, the presence behind the image. Not just stillness. Not just an absence of movement. Something was behind that frozen frame, and it was beginning to know he was watching. He tried, over the following days, to ignore the window, to avoid glancing at it in passing, to draw the curtain each morning and keep it closed until the night had fully settled, to pretend that whatever he had seen in the shadows had been a product of sleeplessness, of loneliness, of an imagination too long left to feed on silence. But the problem wasn't the image itself, the frozen alley, the unchanging wall, the unnatural light, it was the feeling that the act of looking had changed something, that by noticing the stillness, he had opened a door that was never meant to be found, let alone acknowledged. Because now the silence had spread. It was no longer just around the window. It was seeping into the floorboards, nestling beneath the furniture, humming faintly in the gaps between footsteps, infecting even the rhythm of his own breathing. The air grew thicker, not heavier, not warmer, just denser, like something was pressing back against his existence, narrowing the room molecule by molecule until the space felt too precise, too measured, like it was built for something else, and he was only squatting in it. Then came the night when he forgot to close the curtain. He had fallen asleep on the couch, the television's flickering light casting pale shapes across the walls, and when he stirred in the early morning hours, shivering from a cold that hadn't been there before, the first thing he saw was the uncovered window, glowing with that same impossible light. The alley, the wall, the pooling shadows, all identical, unchanged, but this time he could swear the angle was different. Not from his point of view, but from the window itself, the perspective had shifted, subtly, as though the view had been taken from a few inches to the left, or perhaps a few inches closer. He stood slowly, every muscle tensing without command, as though the body had recognized a threat before the mind could name it. He stepped toward the window, cautiously, not out of curiosity anymore, but out of the dreadful awareness that whatever lay beyond it was now watching from the other side. And when he got close enough to see his own reflection faintly overlaying the image, he froze, because the alley behind him, behind his reflected shoulder, was different. Not in the actual glass, that still showed the same dead wall, but in the reflection itself. The shadow on the ground, the one that had always slouched in the corner, had moved, and in the dim overlap between his face and the view beyond, it now resembled the bent outline of a figure, standing. Not crouched. Not half visible.